The Tank Destroyer Doctrine was a profoundly unique and controversial military concept, formulated and intensely championed by the U.S. Army during the critical period between 1941 and 1943. This doctrine was conceived as a direct, urgent, and specialized response to the stunning, devastating success of the German blitzkrieg armored tactics witnessed during the 1940 invasion and rapid conquest of France, where massive, coordinated tank formations proved overwhelmingly effective. The core philosophical premise was revolutionary for the time. The primary dedicated role of the U.S. Army's armored force, tanks, was defined as exploiting infantry breakthroughs, seizing terrain, and providing general support, not engaging enemy armor in dedicated tank-on-tank battles. Instead, a separate, highly specialized, and tactically distinct branch, the Tank Destroyer (TD) force, was to be singularly born to kill enemy armor and operate exclusively in an aggressive anti-tank defense role. The necessity of the doctrine quickly led to the formal creation of the Tank Destroyer Command in December 1941, shortly after the U.S. entered the war. This new command was led by Colonel, later Major General, Andrew Bruce, who became the chief intellectual and philosophical architect of the entire TD concept. Bruce was adamant that to be effective, tank destroyers needed to possess a distinct and superior combination of attributes. They had to be significantly faster, more heavily armed with high-velocity guns, and crucially, vastly more mobile than the heavier, slower tanks they were specifically designed to hunt and destroy. This intense focus on speed and maneuverability was foundational because the doctrine explicitly rejected static defense. Instead, TDs were meant to rapidly maneuver to flank attacking enemy armor from unexpected directions, creating tactical ambushes. The TD force was designed to operate exclusively as a strategic and mobile reserve unit, maximizing flexibility across the entire theater of operations. Unlike regular anti-tank guns or tank battalions, TDs were not permanently assigned to specific infantry or armored divisions. Instead, they were held centrally under the command of the Corps or Army headquarters. The moment intelligence confirmed a major enemy tank thrust, TD units would be rushed at maximum speed to the most threatened sector. Their ideal engagement model was encapsulated in the motto, "Seek, strike, and destroy," or "Hunt, don't be hunted." TDs would lure the enemy into a carefully chosen trap, use their superior speed and observation to outflank the slower German tanks, and then destroy them with concentrated, rapid, high-velocity fire, typically engaging from concealed, prepared positions before swiftly relocating. Executing this unique hit-and-run strategy required a distinct new class of military vehicle fundamentally different from the standard M4 Sherman. American tank destroyers were characterized by two specific, non-negotiable design trade-offs that set them apart from both Allied and German tanks: the mounting of high-velocity, dedicated anti-tank guns, and the intentional use of light armor coupled with open-top turrets. The requirement for high-velocity guns was non-negotiable, as they provided the muzzle energy necessary to penetrate the progressively thicker frontal armor of formidable German tanks, such as the Tiger I and Panther. The light armor and open-top turrets were an explicit, debated decision, deliberately sacrificing crew protection for maximized speed, rate of fire, and commander visibility. The principal weapon system that initiated the Tank Destroyer Force's entry into combat was the M10 gun motor carriage, which began full production in 1942. Built using a reliable, modified hull derived from the M4 Sherman chassis, the M10 was distinguished by its powerful 3-inch, 76.2mm high-velocity gun housed in a unique, heavily sloped but open-top turret. While based on the Sherman, the M10 was intentionally lighter, giving it significantly greater operational speed and better tactical agility than the standard medium tank. Thousands of M10s were ultimately produced, seeing crucial service across the diverse terrains of North Africa, the harsh Italian campaign, and the initial brutal fighting following the Normandy landings, serving as the TD Command's core contribution to the early and mid-war effort. The doctrine placed an extremely high premium on superior observation and the use of high-quality optics for the TD crew to effectively spot and engage enemy armor first. The controversial open-top turret was justified by its proponents not only as a means to reduce the overall weight, thus increasing speed, but also, critically, to provide the TD commander and crew with a 360-degree, completely unobstructed view of the battlefield. This superior visibility was deemed absolutely essential for the commander to immediately spot approaching enemy forces and precisely direct the rapid flanking maneuvers and fire required by the doctrine. This exposed open design, however, made the crew shockingly vulnerable to every type of indirect fire, including tree bursts from artillery, shrapnel from mortar fire, and highly effective German snipers positioned in elevated terrain. The initial TD force was organized into both self-propelled units, using dedicated tracked vehicles like the M10, and towed units. The towed units utilized heavy anti-tank guns, such as the American 3-inch anti-tank gun, and later the British-derived powerful 57mm M1 gun, all mounted on wheeled carriages. While these towed units offered excellent initial hitting power and were inexpensive and quick to mass produce, they suffered from a fatal doctrine-violating flaw. They were inherently highly immobile, extremely slow to deploy, and agonizingly difficult to reposition quickly once an engagement began. This proved utterly unsuitable for the fluid, mobile ambush tactics prescribed by Major General Bruce. Consequently, most towed TD units were gradually disbanded or, where feasible, converted to utilize the more mobile, self-propelled chassis. The M36 Jackson gun motor carriage represented the final, most effective, and ultimately most necessary evolution of the American tank destroyer design. Introduced later, in 1944, the M36 mounted the massive, long-barreled 90mm M3 gun, a weapon system that finally provided American TD forces with the necessary overwhelming firepower to reliably and consistently defeat the thick frontal armor of the most fearsome German tanks, including the Tiger Wom and Panther, often at significantly long ranges. The M36 design was essentially a heavier, adapted M10 hull, modified to safely carry the much larger, newly designed turret and the heavier 90mm gun, quickly establishing itself as the most effective dedicated American anti-tank platform of the entire war. The theoretical elegance of the doctrine often shattered when confronted with the complex operational realities on the European battlefields. Instead of encountering the envisioned concentrated grand-scale blitzkrieg, thrusts suitable for organized counter-maneuvers, TD units frequently found themselves thrust into bitter, close-quarters infantry support roles, especially in the restrictive hedgerows, bocage, of Normandy and the chaotic urban fighting in Italian and German towns. In these confined environments, their light armor and completely open tops proved to be a severe and deadly liability when fighting entrenched infantry, who could easily suppress the crews with concentrated small arms fire and neutralize the vehicles with close-range anti-tank weapons or grenades thrown directly inside the turret. The M18 Hellcat remains the most extreme expression of the doctrine's fanatical focus on speed. Built on an advanced torsion bar suspension system and utilizing lightweight components, the Hellcat was unequivocally the fastest tracked armored vehicle deployed by any nation in the war, capable of astonishing on-road speeds exceeding 55 mph, 88 km/h. Its assigned mission was one of pure aggressive destroyer, rush at top speed to the designated flank, engage the enemy briefly with its 76mm gun, and immediately use its velocity to relocate to a new ambush position. Despite its unparalleled speed, its 76mm gun often struggled to reliably penetrate the thick frontal glasses of the German Panther tank, forcing the Hellcat crews to rely strictly and constantly on complex, difficult, and dangerous flanking maneuvers for success. The concept of a separate tank destroyer command attracted fierce, ongoing criticism from established military branches, particularly the armored force and the infantry. Critics argued that anti-tank duties should be fully integrated into the existing structure. However, General Leslie J. McNair, the highly influential chief of the Army Ground Forces, remained the doctrine's key institutional defender. McNair strongly believed that a dedicated, highly specialized force was the only feasible way to effectively meet the German armored threat, without compromising the crucial, momentum-driven offensive role of the main American tank force, viewing the TD force as a necessary, agile counterpunch capability. The strategic utility and effectiveness of the TDs reached their absolute peak during the largest German counter-offensives. During the ferocious Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, TD units, including the M10s and the newly arriving M36s, performed with incredible, decisive heroism. Rushed desperately to block the sudden, massive German panzer spearheads, they were often forced into static, defensive, close-range actions, a complete, tactical contradiction of the mobile reserve concept. Despite this, their sacrifice proved absolutely crucial in halting the desperate German advance by effectively trading their vulnerable armor and crews for priceless time and tactical superiority. A key organizational feature designed to support the mobile reserve concept was the establishment of tank destroyer battalions. Each TD battalion was a standardized, self-contained unit, typically consisting of 3 companies of specialized tank destroyers, supported by dedicated motorized reconnaissance platoons and a centralized headquarters element. This modular, flexible organization allowed the TDs to be rapidly attached or detached from various corps and armies as needed by the central command, ensuring maximum flexibility and the ability to rapidly deploy to any emerging hotspot, fulfilling the doctrine's need for battlefield agility. The necessity of the open turret fundamentally altered the scope of crew training and the tactics employed by the TD operators. Crews were rigorously trained to rely almost entirely on superior situational awareness, speed, and aggressive reconnaissance for their survival, rather than on the armor protection their vehicles intentionally lacked. Their tactical engagements were often reduced to a simple mandate: one shot, then immediately move. Crews were mandated to wear extra protective gear, helmets, heavy goggles, due to the complete exposure of the open top, and were fanatically taught to use camouflage netting and natural concealment constantly to prevent premature discovery by enemy observers or snipers. As the European campaign matured, the inherent problems and rigid inflexibility of the TD doctrine became increasingly obvious and problematic. The infrequent appearance of the large, concentrated German tank thrusts that the doctrine was designed for meant that the highly specialized TD units were often severely underutilized for their intended role. When they were committed to action, it was frustratingly often in the roles the doctrine explicitly forbade, supporting infantry in head-on assaults, engaging in static defense, or clearing minefields, situations where the TD's deliberate vulnerability was most exposed and most devastating. Critical, often overlooked operational disadvantage between TDs and tanks was the allocation of industrial resources and chassis technology. In the early war years, the TD force was often compelled to utilize lower priority, older components, and obsolete chassis, such as the aging M3 Lee chassis for the early M10, while the newer, more powerful and resilient chassis designs were consistently reserved for the main armored force divisions, which significantly slowed the necessary technological and armored evolution of the dedicated TD arm. The rigid U.S. Army emphasis on extreme specialization, as physically embodied by the TD doctrine, ultimately clashed with the growing, unavoidable need for versatility demanded by the complex combined arms battlefield. The standard M4 Sherman tank, despite its initial firepower disadvantage, was inherently and structurally far more versatile, offering its crew superior protection and proving exponentially more capable of supporting infantry while still possessing the necessary capability to engage enemy armor, creating a profound and expensive philosophical conflict between the two separate branches. One of the most defining and successful TD actions involved the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion during the pivotal North African campaign. They played an absolutely crucial, decisive role in the Battle of El Guetar, March 1943, where their M3 gun motor carriages, carrying the 75mm gun, successfully ambushed a counter-attacking German tank force. They managed to successfully stop the German advance cold, providing a powerful, early war validation of the doctrine's viability when executed in its intended scenario of open-field surprise ambush. The doctrinal focus on achieving maximum speed and operational mobility created a complex and relentless logistical and maintenance challenge. TD units, functioning as highly centralized reserves, were frequently required to cover vast geographic distances in extremely short time frames. This demanding operational tempo necessitated the establishment of highly efficient, dedicated maintenance and repair sections, often severely straining the already stretched supply lines that were prioritizing the continuous support of the massive frontline armored and infantry divisions. By 1944, the doctrine's theoretical foundations were being openly and rigorously questioned by senior field commanders who understood the practical realities of the fight. General George S. Patton, Jr., while openly recognizing the powerful anti-tank punch of the M10 and M36, strongly preferred that the anti-tank role be permanently and fully integrated into the armored divisions, consistently advocating for a universal tank-on-tank fighting capability within the main force, a concept the rigid TD doctrine specifically and vehemently forbade. The unstoppable technological evolution of the standard medium tank chassis ultimately and decisively negated the strategic need for the separate TD force. When the highly capable M4A3E8 EZ-8 Sherman arrived late in the war, equipped with the necessary high-velocity 76mm gun and a vastly improved suspension system, it offered sufficient integral anti-tank firepower combined with superior all-around armor protection and operational versatility. This development effectively blurred the tactical and functional lines between a purpose-built tank and a separate tank destroyer, making the latter redundant. The end of the Tank Destroyer Command was swift and unambiguous, following the cessation of hostilities. In November 1945, the U.S. Army officially and completely disbanded the entire command structure. The official post-war military verdict was clear. The doctrine had been fundamentally made obsolete by the inevitable increase in gun power and armor protection of the standard main battle tank and the rapid development of new, highly effective, man-portable infantry anti-tank weapons like the improved bazooka and shape-charge ordnance. The ultimate and often debated legacy of the TD doctrine is historically complex. It undeniably and successfully addressed a critical American capability gap early in the war, preventing the U.S. from being caught totally unprepared by German armored superiority. However, its rigid philosophical foundation, based on the transient and specialized nature of tank versus tank engagements, proved far too narrow, inflexible, and ultimately ill-suited for the diverse and fluid requirements of the European combined arms battlefield. The doctrine's non-negotiable sacrifice of heavy armor for speed, which was justified by the philosophical hunt, don't be hunted mandate, ultimately carried a heavy and unnecessary human cost. The documented high casualty rates suffered by TD crews, particularly due to the pervasive threat of mortar, artillery shrapnel, and targeted sniper fire directly exploiting the exposed, open-top turrets, contributed significantly to the definitive post-war decision to permanently and fully integrate universal anti-tank capabilities into a universally armored main battle tank design. In the final act of disbanding the Tank Destroyer Command, the U.S. Army made a powerful and definitive statement, moving entirely away from the concept of a separate, specialized anti-tank force. The enduring military lesson learned was that every element of a modern combined arms force must possess the inherent capability to defend itself against all threats. This philosophical realization directly led to the post-war development that the main tank must be a versatile, heavily armored platform capable of simultaneously supporting infantry, clearing objectives, and decisively destroying enemy armor, a concept that permanently culminated in the modern main battle tank, MBT philosophy.